Hello, everyone. Welcome to our latest Sifted Talks in partnership with Pleo. I'm Tom, Sifted's fintech reporter, and I'm super excited to be moderating this very topical talk on how to build a modern finance team. So, during this talk, we're going to discuss the strategies and tactics finance teams are implementing in 2025, as well as diving deep into what a modern CFO's tech stack should include, so that finance execs and anyone who might be interested as well, many of whom I imagine are in our lovely audience, can identify what they should prioritize in the year ahead. So it should be a very actionable session. But before I kind of really get into it and kick things off, I want to introduce our lovely panelists. So today joining me, I have Andrew Hodgson, who's the Chief Financial Officer at employee benefits and health platform Peppy. Andrew was previously part of Uber as its head of finance for Northern and Eastern Europe, while the company went for its IBO. So I'm sure he has many war stories from that time. I also have Karen Swain. She's the Chief Financial Officer at Kindred Capital, which is a VC firm based in London. Karen was previously the Financial Director at Molten Ventures. So we're in very good hands to get the kind of VC perspective on financial teams. Also joining me is Marta Obrador, the Business Transformation Director at Expenses Fintech Pleo. Marta started her career at Apple and Salesforce, where she worked in their finance teams before jumping into the startup world. And last but not least, I have Angus Hardy, CFO at B2B travel tech platform Holibob. Holibob describes itself as an e-commerce engine, making it easier for travel brands to sell experiences online. Angus is not only leads Holibob's financial operations, but is also its founder. So we have the kind of founder CFO's perspective covered nicely as well. Yes, really looking forward to hearing from our panelists. But just to do some housekeeping before I start. So you should, everyone, all our attendees should be able to see there's a Q&A box right at the bottom with a Q&A and a question mark. So please do free to kind of send questions at any time throughout this talk. And we're going to try and kind of get some where they're appropriate in the conversation. So rather than having like a bit at the end where we do Q&A, we should also weave them in whenever they kind of work in what we're talking about. And please don't be shy. If I have time, I want to try and get to every single audience question. So to kick things off, so the CFO function seen a little bit of upheaval recently. So in the kind of private tech sector, Monzo, Canva, and Gymshark are just some of the kind of couple private companies that have had changes in the financial function in the last 6 months. And the same thing can be kind of said on the the public market as well. So for public companies in the first half of 2024, CFO turnover of public companies around the world hit a 3-year high, with a total of 163 CFOs appointed at public companies on the 12 major stock indexes, according to the Russell Reynolds Global CFO Turnover Index. And I wanted to start off with a question is, what is actually driving this change? What's behind this turnover? And are people in the CFO function okay? Luckily enough, we are joined by lots of people in the finance function here. So I wanted to start off that. Angus, would you like to kick things off?
Happy to kick things off. I guess in terms of sort of the private market stuff, probably can't talk to the public markets anything like as much, but there's been real quite change in the landscape in terms of startups and private companies and the direction that they're trying to head in. Sort of 2-3 years ago, it was certainly growth. 3-4 years ago, maybe now, it's sort of growth at all costs. And there was a lot of venture capital cash swirling around, and it's well documented, the valuations and the investments that were happening back then. And, very much, I think at that time, there was the philosophy of raise cash, spend it, hiring lots of people and expect the sort of numbers to drop out the bottom. Whereas now it's slightly different in that you kind of only want to be able, or it feels like more the philosophy now is you only want to be a couple of levers pulled away from getting to some sort of level of sustainable growth. And I guess with that change in mindset, it's natural that you'd see a bit of a changing in the sort of strategic approaches of these different businesses. So yeah, I think we are definitely living in a different world now from that perspective. And yeah, it's also been, pretty well documented of all the layoffs that have happened over the last 2-3 years from Stripe. They had sort of there's hit the press in a big way. So yeah, we're just in probably a little bit of a different world now. And maybe it's not that surprising then that there are people changing in these functions.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I was going to say, I agree. I think the pre-COVID and COVID era versus the post-COVID era, two very, very different landscapes for the CFO to navigate. We're out of that ZERP era now. The cost of capital is higher. There's not as much money floating around. There's obviously in the VC world a bit of a liquidity crunch, or more than a bit of a liquidity crunch going on. So I think it's natural for firms to be looking for a change of guard. Strategies are having to change. And approaches to growth are changing.
Would you say that in this context, it's harder to kind of recruit and retain people in the finance function?
I think so. I think recruiting good people in finance is always difficult anyway. And the harder the landscape is, the harder the market is, the greater the need for good people. And so, yeah, absolutely becomes harder to recruit and retain really good people.
Marta, I see you nodding. Is there anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, I think recently we have, hired quite a few people at Pleo, and it has been really, really hard to find good talent. You're reaching out to people that they would fit perfectly for the role, and they just have so many opportunities elsewhere that is really difficult. And I would say my learning in the last couple of months is really referrals, right? Like someone that works already in the company, picking up the phone and saying to someone else that they worked in the past, hey, this is a good company to work for. This is something like you're going to enjoy, has been my lifesaver, really. And that's how we have built this team. And also, as you say, like it's a group of people that know each other for a very long time. They know how to work with each other, so they last longer in the company, so you can retain them for a bit longer. So that has worked quite well for me.
Yeah, I very much agree with what Marta's saying there. It really feels like the recruiting shifted to me. Certainly the experience I've had recently, and I've been recruiting a head of FP&A role, and the way everything's sort of optimized now through LinkedIn and the way everything's automated, you just get deluged with inbound. I mean, I think I had something like 600 applications for my head of FP&A role in a matter of days. But the quality of those, the huge majority of that are simply not right, simply not qualified, and trying to actually weed through that noise and actually find good candidates. I'm finding it's harder than ever. And to Marta's point, I found the most effective way to do that is really to leverage the network and to get referrals and confidence from the network. So certainly if anyone's looking to get into those roles, don't underestimate the power and time and input that you should be putting into networking and building your group of fellow finance professionals. That's how you're going to find the right people and get the right jobs, I think.
Yeah, networking is always important. Yeah, do you think also the expectations of a CFO and a company finance team have changed in 2025 dramatically in the past year?
I think maybe the demands, again, going back to the fact that it's a tougher sort of landscape, the demands have definitely increased. And I think there's a greater push. And I think, this has been over the past few years, really a greater push for more strategic side of the CFO rather than that sort of traditional finance only piece. So I think firms are looking for their CFO to be more of a thought partner and somebody to help guide and lead strategy.
So what would you say is driving that kind of push, changing the kind of priorities more to the strategic side?
I mean,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Karen. No, I mean, I think for me, it comes back to some of the points that Angus and Karen were making earlier around that money is no longer so easy to come across, which means you've got to make it go further. You've got to be really thoughtful about where and how you deploy your capital. I think the CFO, and I think, well, my experience, hopefully CEOs respect that CFOs have some of the best visibility and view and takes on those tough questions of anyone else in the organization, and are therefore leaning on them that much more for those strategic questions.
I think I would add to that the part I fully agree with the strategic skill set is definitely needed. I would add the technology bit on top. You were saying, Andrew, you were hiring a head of FP&A. I guess no longer now is needed to someone that knows how to do modeling, how to, strategic forecasting, but also if you are about to implement any technology to support the function, how comfortable is that person, researching what is the right technology, implementing that, and then most importantly, maintaining it, right? Not just going back to the old Excel sheets or Google Sheets, but actually knowing how to use technology and embrace it is a key skill set that we didn't maybe look for in the past as much.
And what kind of strategies are finance teams implementing in 2025, Marta?
I think for me, the biggest one is forecasting right now, right? Like it has always been really, really important, right? Like especially revenue forecasting has been always critical. But right now with all these AI solutions that we have, is really using them in the right way. And there is no one solution that fixes the whole problem, right? But finding where to implement AI in a way that then reporting and forecasting becomes accurate, agile. We need to be really quick, change to the conditions. And I think that's the biggest strategy that I see right now in the function.
I think it's that holistic view as well, and making sure that there are so many options out there, is making sure that you have that single source of truth that then drives everything, that feeds into everything else. Otherwise, you end up managing multiple platforms and sources of data, which can very quickly get out of control because there's so much out there that you can use.
Fully agree.
And since we're on the kind of topic of AI agents, one of the questions of your audience is, can you give actually a few examples of AI agents that can help in forecasting and planning?
There's many, right? I guess.
Sorry, I missed that. But yeah, I mean, there's quite a few out there. There's lots of sort of innovation going on in that space at the moment. And, the Zero App Store is a pretty easy place for people to start a startup and to surface on there. So there's a lot of sort of innovation and creativity on there. And there's quite a few FP&A tools that have been around, sort of trying to replace the FP&A function, Data Rails, Abacum, Mosaic. I've had a look at a few of those. We've not kind of got to the stage where we've actually used one of them yet, but there's some really interesting stuff going on there. And maybe more recently, there's quite a few sort of AI products coming out to support kind of closing month end, which I find maybe a bit more interesting. So Hayden, Haydn, is a UK one that's reasonably recent, and they're sort of, how do we use AI to get to the 0 month end close is kind of their big sales pitch. As Karen said, that there's so many of these systems out there, and trying to kind of plug them all together so that really you can try and run a finance function with a lean headcount and lean on all the tools today is sort of the flavor of the day, if you like.
It feels like the challenge is actually a huge challenge is actually picking the right one. If you're trying to build something scalable, what you don't want to do is be rowing it back 6 months down the line because something new. There's always the next best thing, isn't there? The kind of, what's the opportunity cost of doing it now versus, you can almost get that analysis paralysis around it. There's so much to kind of choose from.
Is there a particular point in a sort of business's life cycle where it's the right point to like introduce a new tech tool?
I would say expansion. Oh, sorry, Andrew, you were going to say?
No, you can't carry on, Marta.
I think expansion, right? Like going into different markets is where businesses, then they need really an ERP that can consolidate and to scale with them, right? I think that would be one of the signs you need to look at your tech stack.
Yeah, I agree with that. The core ERP, absolutely. There's definitely stages, but more broadly, the tech around the edge, some of the things that Angus was probably talking about. I mean, I think we're in a very much an experimentation zone at the moment. To Karen's point, I don't think anyone's really won and definitively come out as this is the must-have tool in finance. There's so many out there, and we're certainly in experimentation mode at the moment. And I think that should always be something that's on the agenda, irrespective of size and scale.
And would you say is automating kind of the most important solution to reducing turnover and retaining people?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see where things develop. I mean, I've actually, again, similar to Angus, I've started getting the place I've started hasn't so much been forecasting, it's actually been in the close process and the accounting. That for me, I can see more immediate value and have more confidence in the agentic tools that are emerging in that space, and that's where I've put most of my efforts so far. But absolutely, it's going to creep into FP&A and forecasting. I'm excited to see how that goes. But then, yeah, I think the skill sets then change. If you think about the accounting side of things and the controlling side of things, the skill set's not going to be so much about managing junior AP clerks and AR clerks. It's going to be about managing an agentic tech stack in the right way, and how people can get to that position and how you can find the talent who can do that in the right way, paired with classical accounting skills. I think it's going to be a really interesting adventure for all of us.
And I guess things like the financial close, like you mentioned, right, that typically takes up quite a lot of bandwidth, right, for the financial team. If that's all automated, yeah, what's going to be the kind of the priority for the CFO and the financial team that report to them?
Well, I think
sorry, Andrew, carry on.
No, you go, Karen. I answered the last one. You go.
Oh no, I was just going to say, I think it frees up time for the value add that you were talking about, an head of FP&A. I think that's been emerging over the last couple of years. That's a really key role in any organization, and actually being able to provide that kind of insight, which again feeds into that sort of more strategic role of the CFO going forward. The more that we can sort of automate the BAU things, the more sort of AI is great, but the more brain power, where you need a bit of ingenuity or sort of blue sky thinking, or trying to sort of come up with more strategic direction. I think it frees up time to do that.
Yeah, I could completely agree with that. But the other thing, I guess, the other angle I would take on it, that certainly exercising my thinking at the moment, is almost the danger in not necessarily over automating the close and the accounting, but losing sight of that, because absolutely we should automate that, and that should help. But I don't see a world in which the CFO is not ultimately accountable for the accuracy, validity of those numbers. And that's something I'm working through at the moment, as to how to ensure there's enough time, bandwidth, understanding, checks in place of those automations that you can still rely on the accuracy and validity of those numbers.
Yeah, it's that risk mitigation, isn't it? Because the more that stuff gets automated in sort of 5-10 years time, is it going to be a lost art to understand how to do it without a machine doing it for you? So yeah.
And I would add to it, I've tried to implement many tools with finance experts that maybe not necessarily know how to do it manually by themselves, and then the implementation fails. So I would say you cannot maintain a tool if you know how to do it on Excel. It just doesn't work. So the skill is still very much needed. And then you need another layer of a skill, is how to translate what you know what to do in an Excel into customizing a tool, right? So yeah, it doesn't go away, does it?
Would you say it's possible to have too many kind of software options in the financing function, and so much kind of creates a learning curve, right, for new and I guess existing employees to get to grips with? Yeah,
I think I've seen many finance experts that get too overwhelmed. There is too many tools, too much, and their brain just goes back to the basics, and nearly pen and paper and just problem solving. Yeah. So it's not for everyone, really. And then there is the other extreme, where people really embrace the technology, enjoys it, and wouldn't want to work in an environment where technology is not available. So is finding how to cater for each of the different roles that you have, and make sure that everyone has the space in the team, that you actually need a bit of both. So it's just finding their place is key.
And
And
then
I think to what you were saying, Marta, sorry, about the struggle with recruiting, it can make that harder. It used to be, I don't know, maybe 5-10 years ago that in finance, you can use Sage, or there was a handful of programs that you needed to know how to use, whereas now it's all very bespoke to whichever company you're looking to join. So there's a whole onboarding piece of bringing people up to speed, because you can't possibly, with so many different options, people aren't going to already have that kind of experience necessarily with your particular tech stack when they join.
And you do have to be careful as well, right? I mean, not just in finance, but across the wider organization. I'm sure you guys will have found the same. But one of the banes of my life as CFO is people in the business bringing in endless SaaS tools, half of which ended up stranded or unused. And there's a significant cost to those things. I mean, you can really undermine the value that you're getting from your automations if you don't manage your tech stack in a careful and thoughtful way.
100%.
Yeah, we're in this sort of super exciting innovation space where there's lots of new stuff coming out, and of course the risks with that is there isn't a clear front runner or a clear leader. So probably all of us are nervous of sinking a load of time and effort into learning a tool, then for it to become out of date in this kind of this real change. I mean, I sort of think to an extent, Excel is still it's a product that everyone uses and everyone's familiar with, and it's kind of quite easy to forget actually that I think Microsoft have things about 10,000 sort of very bright people working on the Excel product. So it's going to take something pretty special, I guess, to actually change the way that no one's using Excel before. So I don't think sort of Excel's a lost art. Interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Angus. I know I'm probably not following the marketeers line of what they're pushing on all the various platforms. If anyone that uses Excel is going to get left behind, and that's not the future. I agree with you, and especially in the earlier stages. I know I still run all my FP&A off a combination of Google Sheets and Excel. Sure, I'm playing around the edges with GPT wrappers and assistants and stuff, but fundamentally that's the core of it. Just because it just gives you the flexibility. I've always been super nervous about putting in too many bespoke FP&A tools in a position where the business is not 100% stable, 100% set. In an earlier stage where you're still pivoting around and experimenting, tools, Excel remains the most flexible tool out there. And there's real value in that at that stage.
So would you say that the hype over like AI accounting agents or AI agents specifically geared towards the office of the CFO, would you say that's all kind of a little bit overblown, that we already have the tools that we need?
I'm not sure
they can be enhanced.
Yeah.
But I think we do end up exporting a lot of it to Excel ultimately in the end anyway. So
Okay, so Excel is still king.
Yes. And to the conversation earlier, I definitely think on the raw accounting automation side and close management, that for me is where there's real excitement and real value in some of the emerging agentic solutions.
And I guess just to play a bit more kind of devil's advocate on the AI side, so obviously there's a lot of buzz in it, but at the same time, right, kind of the best way to retain and recruit employees, right, across all functions, not just the finance function, is to give their role importance. And if those in the finance function maybe feel that a piece of software can automate their job, how would you say that impacts morale?
I mean, in my experience, I don't know that I found something that would just almost or have looked to implement anything that would remove somebody's role. I think generally people are quite keen to learn how these things work. And generally it tends to be automating, certainly in my experience, the more those real BAU things, whether it's expense management to Pleo, or things like that, which actually creates opportunities for people to grow and develop into, to build their role up into something more than that almost sort of entry level data processing.
And there's a question from the audience as well, from Michelle, who's asking, So she always says, finance team is people and tools, but is it possible to be too lean for a finance function? But how lean is too lean for a finance function?
I can take
I
that.
guess it depends.
Yeah, I think that's the answer, isn't it? It kind of depends. I think,
Yeah.
my CTO is pretty good. Always reminds me that in the sort of budget allocation, commercial trumps tech and tech trumps finance. And so, you are a cost center and you need to try and be as small as it can possibly be. But then obviously the other tension is you've got to make sure everything's right. So sort of balance to strike there. But yeah, I don't think there's anyone that would be wanting to spend one more pound on the finance team when it could be invested in sales and marketing. So,
Okay. And I guess aside from AI, what should like the finance tech stack include for a modern company?
I think finance is the best function to simplify tech stack, right? I think I love finance because if you have a very powerful ERP, you could be done, right? Like if you want to, that's it. That's what you need. Really good ERP. Then Andrea, I agree with you. FP&A on Excel, it will always work, right? Like you don't need an EPM really. And then, yeah, if you can have commissions tools, you can have expense management, whatever. But if you focus on the ERP and you have a good one and you integrate it with the rest of the company as it should be, then going back to Karen's point, which I love about single source of truth, then it just becomes very compliant, very easy, very scalable, right?
And then how can staff, say, in other functions support the finance team? Anyone wants to take that?
Yeah, always a good question, right? I mean, I think engaging with the processes and systems, and that's a kind of two-way street. So to Marta's point, I mean, I'm a big fan of expenses management programs to sit outside of the core ERP, and you want to make sure they're usable, they're straightforward, they're simple, and that really can help you drive compliance. But ultimately, it's the same stuff. It's about the wider teams understanding what finance are trying to achieve, what they're here for, and helping to educate them on that and make them see your perspectives. Hopefully they'll be allies and advocates in what you're trying to achieve, following policies, ensuring compliance, and that sets you up to ultimately drive growth. That's what you're all there to do.
And then Marta, I see both nodding. Is there anything you would
Yeah.
add on?
I mean, this year at Pleo has been really exciting because we have implemented procurement, right? So we have a new procurement function, and I'm super. I was smiling, Andrew, because I'm super proud of the achievements there with the rest of the organization. So we started off with a bit of maybe grumpy faces, oh, procurement, but very, very quickly we have engaged with each stakeholder and looking at their tech stack. The first thing we did is do a picture, like a mirror board of how many tools each team had. And absolutely every team was like, what, really? Do we? All of those? And back to your point, Andrew, they were purchased, years ago. They're tiny expense, but we know we had many. So we reduced not only 50% in terms of number of tools, we now have 50% less than last year. And that just gives an incredible speed and efficiency to the business. I think everyone is really happy to have clean up a little bit the clutter. And obviously the CFO is thrilled because the cost also has reduced drastically. So I think that's the best way for me to collaborate with the finance team is like, we help you to be faster, most efficient, have better technology, and then you help us by controlling the cost as well. And security, we have done very big improvements in terms of security when it comes to technology as well.
And Karen, I guess from a kind of VC perspective, how does collaboration work with the finance team?
Within with the companies that we invest in, do you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
As well within the VC firm.
Yeah. So I mean, where I am at Kindred, we're we're a relatively small team, very open plan kind of office. So everything, is we're really good at all of that kind of communication thing. I think as you get bigger and the organization scales, that can become more challenging. And I think sometimes finance can be seen as they're kind of in the corner, and actually it's a two-way thing. It isn't just how can the rest of the team support finance, it's how can finance support the rest of the business. And I think it starts with that, and then everything else follows. If you can demonstrate value, make yourself visible, integrate yourself into the rest of the business and add that value, be approachable, then the natural synergies just happen, and the relationship just builds and everything gets easier. I think we've moved very far away from that idea that we're just bean counters that sit in the corner and just come out of our office to complain when people go over budget. But I do think there's still, again, to Andrew's point, that whole FP&A thing. There's this whole shift towards FP&A and integrating finance into the rest of the business and kind of leading the charge. So,
what would you say are like the main kind of pressures on the finance team in the current kind of wider like VC funding environment? I guess maybe Angus or Andrew could be a good question for you guys.
Yeah, pressures. I guess there's sort of different levels of pressure on there. I mean, there's the classic internal pressures of people want timely and accurate numbers immediately, live data or close to live data as possible to make the best decisions and gather the best insights. So being able to deliver that in the right way is a constant pressure, and using the tools and the automations at our disposal to try and speed that process up. There's all the good classic compliance stuff coming from the other side of that as well, as to how do you balance, to some of the points that Marta and Karen were making earlier, how do you balance that protecting assets in the business appropriately and having the right levels of compliance and structure in place, but then not that becoming a bureaucratic, overwhelming, growth inhibiting structure. So balancing that tension, a constant thing for finance. And then on the other side of it, which I think we're alluding to, Tom, with the whole fundraising dynamic, how do you make sure that you've got the right capital structure and the right level of funding for the business? Because funding is not as easy to come by as it was a few years ago. So you need to be planning further ahead. You need to have stronger metrics in place to give you a better shot at raising money in the way you want to. You've got to think much more strategically about building those relationships up front, and really looking at different options as to what you're trying to achieve, and then executing against that, which is harder than it was a few years ago from my perspective.
And I guess as a CFO in a VC-backed business, you're always very much focused on those milestones of, from your last funding round, what your milestones are to deliver on, and how do you get to the next, or to the next sort of point where you can go out to raise again, and having delivered on everything that you said that you'd deliver on. Yeah.
No, I guess
Great.
go ahead. So I guess this is a question for Angus, but I mean, so I know that you've fairly recently closed a Series A funding round with Holibob. What was it like to kind of try and build a finance team at the same time as raising funding? Like, how did you kind of map out your day and choose what to prioritize?
With a lot of difficulty. I mean, fundraising notoriously, takes loads of your time up. And we had a pretty thorough due diligence process that we needed to go to. This was about a year ago now. And that was sort of through our Series A. So you're going through that interesting transition of being quite a small team, still a lot of people doing a lot of things, to then trying to professionalize very quickly, kind of off the back of that, and bring in the right expertise. And of course, it takes time to hire, real experts in different areas. So I mean, leaning on the tools that make your life easier, so you have more time for those other items that you described is super important. And trying to plug into the networks really, and understand who's done these paths before and what were the pitfalls, and trying to understand that, because I mean, just fundraising in itself, it's just so much nuance to it, that you really want to try and get people who've done it before, speak to them, understand what's going on, and make sure that the finance, the day-to-day doesn't suffer.
I imagine it's a lot of kind of juggling different priorities, right? Day to day, right? When you're doing that.
Yeah, for sure. Which is why I think that, the direction of travel, these tools that can give you more time to be in that kind of headspace rather than in the back sheets of an Excel model is sort of so valuable. So, more of those tools, the better. And to Andrew's point a moment ago, the landscapes are sort of shifting. There is less cash out there from a VC perspective. There might be businesses that are suddenly getting under a lot of pressure from sort of AI competitors and things. So, I guess understanding what the next 2-3 years look like is probably harder than it was a few years ago, or certainly seemed like it was going to be a few years ago. And so kind of your scenario analysis kind of comes a lot broader, and then as a result, you need to be thinking more about it and spending more time in that headspace so that if something changes, then you've got a response.
Are there any kind of new tools that you implemented specifically during the fundraising process, kind of, I guess, make things a bit more efficient?
Not during the fundraising process. I mean, in the run up to it, we talked quite a lot about putting an ERP system in, and we did look at a number of them. But we're still on zero. And actually, I think we will try and stay on zero for sort of as long as we can. I feel there's maybe a bit of a different. People are trying to get more out of zero, I feel, these days, rather than, spending 100 grand plus on a NetSuite integration, although inevitably that'll come at some point. I mean, Andrew, you're a bit later stage than us, so I don't know what ERP system you guys use.
Yeah, I mean, the last few roles I've done have been, from Series B then through CD. So I've used NetSuite. Peppy actually at the moment still on zero. And yeah, I agree. Zero can take you a lot further than it could a few years ago, which is great. But I also completely agree that it does get to a point where you go up that traditional ladder, of which there do seem to be some emerging winners. I mean, generally, Zero or QuickBooks seem to be at the earliest stage, particularly in Europe Zero. Then you migrate onto NetSuite. Once you're in the realms of being a proper big corporate, then your SAPs and your Oracles come into play. But that's a very well-established ladder, I think. But the good news from my perspective is Zero can definitely take you further than it could. I mean, we're at Peppy approaching sort of 15 million annual recurring revenue now. Still very comfortable on, I mean, admittedly a relatively simple business model, but we're very comfortable on Zero at that level, and I think it could take us a fair way yet.
And what ERP tools do you use at Pleo and Kindred, out of interest?
We use NetSuite, so I implemented NetSuite now 3 times. But to be honest with you, I'm really excited about there is at least 2 ERPs that are coming up in the market, which are built based on AI. So NetSuite or SAP HANA or whatever you want to buy, or Zero, they're adding AI on top of a very old decrepit code, and that's not going to work, right? Like, that's putting some flowers on top of something that is quite old. I'm really excited. There is Relay is my favorite, but there's a few other in the market coming up, and I can't wait to see what they're going to do in the next couple of years, and I'm definitely going to invest in those in the future to have something that has been built for AI, not adding to it. So yeah, let's see what they can do for us.
And that Kindred, Karen?
Yeah, so again, like Andrew, we're a relatively simple model in terms of the accounts. We use Zero, and to be honest, I've implemented Zero in a previous role outside of the VC space. I wouldn't have necessarily chosen to implement it here because I was quite an early adopter, and to other people's comments, it's come quite a long way, and it's surprising how much you can do with Zero compared to perhaps what 2016 or whenever it was that I implemented it in a previous company. So we're not looking to move away from that.
Great to hear excited, Marta, about some of the emerging competitors. I better take the Rillet reps call next time. Sounds good.
They are amazing. I'm really surprised how a few engineers, they're very good engineers, but how they can just rethink the whole ERP structure from scratch. If I was in NetSuite or SAP, I would be quite worried, to be honest, because this is very promising.
Definitely want to keep an eye on our audience and all the finance teams as well. So we have another question from the audience, going back to kind of our earlier conversation about recruiting. Just has asked, what's the typical recruitment process for finance roles in your companies? Don't know if, Angus, maybe you want to start.
Yeah, I mean, we're a fairly small team. When we're recruiting for a very junior role, sort of a graduate, we do have an Excel test that we ask them to do, which you don't really need any experience from, but it just kind of is an attention to detail thing. And actually, that's served us very well, actually. And when we've kind of taken a candidate that maybe hasn't done that well on that, we've sort of thought, actually, we should listen to this Excel test a bit more. So I definitely think that's worth doing. And then more senior hires, the usual interview process. We don't do anything like tests or anything like that. We kind of just lean on people's experience, and who's a sort of cultural fit at that point. And being able to, sometimes I think hiring from non-startups into startups where, every month things are different, or you're trying to introduce something or whatever, can feel quite different to maybe we're hiring someone from a small oil and gas company that we did once, and 1 month was exactly the same as the next. And I think it is a bit different headspace sort of being in a startup. So that's our process.
Sure, for sure. And Peppy, how are things done, Andrew?
So my process is not dissimilar to Angus, which is good and reassuring to hear. And so very standard interview process. But I guess the two things that I'd point to specifically that I always insist on, everyone does a case study for me. Completely agree with the points Angus was making. Some people are great at interviews, and that's good, but you need to also test they could actually practically do the job. And I found the case study, generally Excel type challenge where they have to present some data back, is the best mechanism I found for doing that. So everyone does a case study for me. I also insist that everyone has an interview with a group of people outside of finance to get their perspective, because I increasingly think that the key skill, or one of the key skills that's going to get more and more prominent, I think Karen made a great point earlier, the automations, the good thing about that is it can free people's time up to do the more value add. The more value add is almost inevitably going to involve more business partnering, more business interaction. So there are finance hires' ability to interact broadly across the organization and not simply speak the language of finance and do well, specifically in the finance world, is really important. So I was insist on that as well.
And that Pleo?
We have also, we call it a challenge, but it's basically a case study as well. And I think one very interesting thing is about, we encourage them to use AI. We said we're all about AI, but please tell us how you have used it. And that part is my favorite, because then you get to know what we were discussing before, like this skill set of how people perceive, use technology. It tells you a lot about how they're going to be able to succeed in their role. So we have various and wonderful answers on how people use AI for the case study or the challenge, and that tells us a lot about them.
That Kindred, how are things done?
Very similar to Angus and Andrew. I love what you just said about asking people how they use AI, Marta. I think that's I'll add that one in to processes going forward. But yes, for junior roles, a kind of basic Excel test. Anybody that's more sort of outward facing. In the past, I haven't recruited into finance at Kindred yet, but I've done very similar kind of case study, but more take some data. How are you going to present it? The presentation of the data is quite key usually. And then, to Marta's point, word of mouth recommendations. Actually, in the past, I've actually gone on LinkedIn myself, found the people I want a recruiter to approach, and then asked the recruiter to approach those people, because you know what you want and what you need. Obviously, there's still the need for a recruiter. I don't have time to be reaching out, and I'm absolutely not the best skilled at it. But I'd say proactive when it comes to recruiting. But the word of mouth or recommendation is always a really good route to go.
And there's another question from the audience from Caroline Diak. Hope I'm pronouncing your name properly. Do you think that the same skill sets are required for the finance function in B2C and B2B businesses? And what are kind of like the nuances between the two? Maybe Andrew or Angus.
Yeah, I know. I've spent most of my career in B2C and are now doing a B2B role. I don't actually think there's that much difference in the fundamental skills. You know, having proper understanding of core accounting, always the necessary foundation that carries over B2C and B2B. A good commercial understanding of the business model. Now, I mean, you know, ideally you're flexible and can handle both B2C and B2B and intellectually can get your head around that. And clearly, if you sort of specialize down in one area, I guess that can help you with that. But broadly, you need to have a commercial understanding and get the business model. And then the rest of it's the people skills increasingly, I think, which I think translates equally across both. I don't see a big difference when dealing with internal stakeholders, whether it's a B2C or a B2B company. Yeah, you need to be able to influence, you need to be able to provide insight in the right way. And I think those skills are pretty universal.
Yeah, but we're a sort of B2B2C company, so we have the fun of like having to do both almost. And I think for the FP&A role, it's quite handy to have someone who understands the differences between that. So our FP&A guy, he was at Gymshark before, so he's actually been very good for when we've been doing the B2C part of our business model, because he just understands marketing flows, click-through rates, all that stuff. So when he's then kind of educating the sales and the product team about what the numbers mean, he can also understand them from sort of our side. So that's I think handy. But yeah, I think the rest of the team pretty simple either.
Marta or Karen, was there anything you would add on top of that, or are the skill sets kind of largely the same?
In my experience, they've been largely the same. You know, I'd agree with what Andrew said. I've personally worked in both B2B and B2C, and yeah, if you understand the model of the business, I think it doesn't really matter who the end user of the product or service is.
Agree.
Okay. And we're coming up towards the end of our time. If there's any more questions for our audience to answer, please submit them. But just to kind of wrap things up with a preliminary question, I'm sure our audience would really love to hear any kind of like actionable advice on how to build the finance team in 2025. So if we could kind of go around the virtual room, I guess, in this case, and if you could kind of give your advice on what companies should do to kind of build and retain their finance team in 2025, I think that'd be a great thing to end things with. Angus, would you like to start?
Yeah, I can go first. It's probably kind of a lot that's been said already in terms of be very aware of all these different tools that come out, and look at them with a degree of skepticism, but also we now aren't employing bookkeepers to sort of do handwritten ledgers and things and debits and credits and all that good stuff. So I'm sure there will still be jobs for people in 10 years' time. They'll just probably look a bit different. So I think definitely keep aware of the different tools and things that are coming out. That would probably be my.
You expect the finance team to hire less in the next 2 to 3 years across the board?
Yeah, we were chatting about this earlier around, there's some sort of noise on LinkedIn at the moment about these companies which are doing incredible ARR rates and growth rates, and they've got a team of 20, 30, 40 people. And I think that's worth considering, in that it's been proven now that you can build these huge sort of unicorns with a team of 50 people. And wow, that could be a bit of a game changer. And how do you swing your thinking around to how do you build this business with 50 people, not 400, 500? Maybe there's a new age coming where a lot of it AI stuff is doing a lot of that. So,
and Karen, what advice would you give to a company building its finance team in 2025?
I think, we've talked a lot about AI and the tech stack, and, that's all really relevant, but don't forget about the team. The essence of any team are the people. So don't forget to develop your people, develop their skills, do that whole succession planning, understand where people want to go, how they want to grow, and support people in that. Yeah, don't lose the focus. To Angus's point, you can build these unicorn businesses with 50 people, but that's still 50 people. And you need to retain the smaller the team, the more important it is that you look after the team, and you can less afford to lose. The smaller the team, the more key the members become. So don't lose sight or focus on people over the tech, I would say.
And internally at Kindred, what sort of initiatives have you kind of put forward or done to kind of retain the right people?
Really, just what I said. Really understanding, what is it that people want to gain in terms of their own personal development, and developing. Okay, so you might not need to know that for your role, but if you're going to retain the talent, you need to give a little bit of things that perhaps, well, that's not necessarily going to benefit me right now. Maybe that's going to benefit your next employer, but that still shouldn't stop you from developing people in the short term.
And Marta, what advice would you give?
I think those are very good advice, and I would definitely follow them as well. But there is this, especially in startups, that the company will change in the next 3 years, right? Like this is something I think when you hire and you build your team, you need to consider. Today we are here. Where am I going to be in 3 years? So what type of talent will I need then? What it had made me quite sad in the past is seeing startups that they built a 50 people company with a certain skill set, and then after a year they need to let them all go and then hire again everyone. There is no need really, right? Like you can just look a little bit forward. So maybe hiring strategically rather than tactically what you need today would be my advice on top of what has been said.
Do you think that kind of mind frame of thinking about what the business might need in 5 years' time, do you think that's something that's been newly implemented? Were people thinking about that when they were hiring in 2021, 2020?
I don't think so, because it's quite this super fast growth that Angus, you were talking about, like unbelievably fast growth is quite recent, isn't it? Especially to the scale we're seeing today. So I think it's a learning for all of us. I think none of us 5 years ago would thought, oh, so many companies have grown so quickly in such a short period of time. So it's quite new, but I think it's something we should have learned by now and really apply going forward.
And Andrew, just before I ask you for your piece of advice, there's a very specific question from Darshan, who's asked, what was the UK-based month-end close tool you use? Yeah.
The AI tools. Yeah, so I'm still in experimentation phase at the moment. So neither of them are hard in, and actually they're not UK based. They're both coming out of the US, and surprisingly,
Okay.
but the two that I've been experimenting with, one's called Nominal. Have a look at Nominal. They're good, and then Numeric. I had a good demo with them. We're experimenting with a little bit at the moment. But yeah, it's still early days. But I think I'm optimistic that both of those have the potential to add real value.
I really like Numeric as well, Andrew.
And yeah, I mean, just to round things off, so what advice would you give to a company building its
Yeah, look, I know that the guys have given fantastic advice, all of which I agree with. Maybe I guess the only point I try and build on there, or think about building on, and the automations and managing those things is clearly really important. But for me, the bit that is not going to be possible for AI to automate is going to be how finance influences the business. So it's those softer skills, it's those people skills. Yeah, that for me is both, what cannot be replaced by AI, but also is where I think finance is going to be able to spend an increasing amount of time, which is a good thing because that's where the value add ultimately is. But both in terms of if you're looking for roles, really doubling down on demonstrating and really sharpening your abilities on those classical softer skills, those influencing abilities across the wider business. And then equally from the hiring process, from the finance team side, actively looking for those skills, testing for those skills, trying to find those skills. That for me is where I'm going to be heading, I suspect, over the next few years.
Well, I guess like in the age of AI, the more human side of finance is going to become more and more important, right? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly. Which I think is really exciting, actually.
As well, so it seems like it's consensus there. Sorry, what were you going to say, Andrew?
No, I think that's really exciting for people actually and for a finance career. I mean, maybe it's just the bias I have towards it, but that for me has always been the most exciting and interesting part of finance. If we can move beyond being counters, as Karen described earlier, that can only be a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice and optimistic note to end on. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, so thanks everybody for taking the time to attend this talk. And thank you to our amazing panelists and our amazing audience as well.